So I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Jacob Osborne, and I'm Senior Advocacy Associate at IAVI in Amsterdam. It's my pleasure to open this Timely Topics webinar on HIV prevention at a crossroads, why we still need an HIV vaccine. Organized by the Global HIV Vaccine Enterprise at the International AIDS Society and IAVI, or known historically to many here as International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. I'd like to welcome all the participants, as well as our speakers, panelists, and moderators. This webinar aims to explore a few things. First, the continued need for an HIV vaccine in the context of the expanding HIV prevention landscape and uncertain geopolitical environment. Second, the potential public health impact of an HIV vaccine, including related socioeconomic and equity considerations. And finally, to reflect on the rising threat to HIV vaccine science and why investments in HIV vaccine R&D remain a strategic priority in the global HIV response. Today's meeting is comprised of one introductory presentation, followed by a 45-minute panel discussion and a 25-minute interactive Q&A session. We encourage you to use the Q&A function on Zoom during the presentation and panel discussion to submit any questions you have for the presenters. Please know that this meeting is recorded, and by participating, you are consenting to being recorded and for the recording to be used publicly for educational purposes. So I'd like to now introduce our co-moderator, Marlene Bra. Marlene brings over 14 years of experience in public health, research, and program management within the HIV field. She's the Director of HIV Programs and Advocacy at IAS, the International AIDS Society, and also serves as the Executive Editor of the Journal of the International AIDS Society, or JIAS. Marlene, over to you.
Thank you, Jacob, and hi, everybody. Today, I'm very happy to start by introducing my co-moderator and presenter, Nyiradzo Mavis Mgodi from the University of Zimbabwe. And Nyiradzo is a clinical trial specialist with almost 2 decades in experience conducting HIV clinical trials in diverse populations in sub-Saharan Africa. She's the lead investigator in multiple clinical trials, assessing various biomedical HIV prevention interventions like vaginal rings, oral PrEP, injectable PrEP, novel drug delivery systems, broadly neutralizing antibodies, and HIV vaccine. And today, Nyiradzo will kick off this webinar with an introductory presentation on HIV vaccine R&D in the context of the expanding prevention landscape and funding crisis. Nyiradzo, over to you to set the scene for this webinar.
Thank you, Marlene, for the kind introduction. Let me just try to share my slides. I just confirm that you can see my slides, Marlene.
So they're not yet in presenter mode. We can, but if you can put them in presenter mode, that should be all good.
Okay, I think it's my network. So if I don't get to presentation mode in the next 30 seconds, maybe
all perfect.
to later.
All good now.
We're good. Perfect. Thank you so much, Marlene, for the kind introduction. I would like to thank the webinar organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak here. I will delve directly into my into the key points of the presentation. We know that significant strides have been made in HIV prevention and treatment, pre-exposure prophylaxis. It began almost a decade ago with the approval of oral TDF taken once daily. And since then, we've made great strides in HIV prevention. And to date, we've got several options, including vaginal rings, including long-acting injectables, and we've also seen some positive signals with broadly neutralizing antibodies. So in the era of long-acting PrEP, an ideal vaccine is still needed. It has got a role to play and could offer additional HIV prevention choice. And I hasten to mention that we have the HIV vaccination field has contributed significantly beyond HIV, for example, COVID. Here, I just want to remind us all of the progress that we've made in terms of HIV prevention. We've come a long way. If you look to the bottom to the right, the bottom panel here shows 10 sub-Saharan African countries. And you can see that most of the countries, including Zimbabwe, we've achieved the UNAIDS 95 targets. And those countries which haven't achieved that, they are close, as you can see, like men over 15 in Malawi, Namibia, Zambia, and so forth. We've also done a lot in terms of HIV prevention. As you can see here, the HIV prevention interventions, we've done well in HIV prevention using combination prevention interventions that are listed in my slide here. We can see PrEP in terms of oral PrEP, long-acting cabotegravir, dapivirine vaginal ring, and the new kid on the block, lenacapavir. So really kudos to everyone in the field. We've done really well in controlling the epidemic. That said, we know that we are still getting way too many new infections. As you can see here, just to reiterate that as of the end of 2023, 2024, almost 40 million people were living with HIV, and about 60% of them women over 15 years. And there have been 1.3 million new infections every year. So really, despite all the prevention products that I talked about, we are still not yet there. We are not on track to reach the 2030 UNAIDS goal of less than we will still be getting new infections. I don't know if you can see my pointer. We are still at 1,300,000 new infections, which is where we are at here. We should be getting less than 900,000 new infections a year for us to reach the target of less than 300,000 new infections per year. So really, despite the fact that we've done very well, we are still not on target. So we need additional HIV prevention methods, including a vaccine. So the possibility of a preventive vaccine is real, and an ideal preventive vaccine would provide long-lasting protection with limited number of doses within a discrete time frame. And this is before the wind of HIV infection. It could be widely distributed and administered confidentially, and it might overcome some of the challenges that we've noted with oral PrEP. And it would accelerate progress towards epidemic control. Modeling shows that a 50% effective vaccine with just 50% population coverage could prevent approximately 850,000 HIV-related deaths over a 30-year period. So really, we need to work towards a preventive HIV vaccine. So it has been 20 years since the field started looking at HIV vaccines, and 12 efficacy trials have been conducted, with only 2 having shown a positive signal. Let's start to the left of my slide here, and thanks to AVAC for this infographic. So in 1998, the first large-scale randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled HIV vaccine trial, that's VAX-004, started in Europe and the United States. And also VAX-003 started in Thailand. Regrettably, both these studies revealed no efficacy in reducing HIV infection or plasma viremia levels. So really, just these disappointing results, they underscored a critical insight. The mere presence of antibodies capable of binding to HIV-1 envelope is insufficient to confer protection against the virus or reduce viral load. So that was VAX 003 and 004. And soon after, the Pambili, the STEP study was conducted in multiple countries. It was stopped early due to futility, as well as the Pambili study, which was conducted in South Africa. Immunizations for Pambili had to be stopped because of the STEP study results. In contrast, the RV144 study, which was conducted in Thailand, it demonstrated a 31.2% reduction in HIV infection rates compared to the placebo, marking the very first instance of a vaccine showing modest efficacy in preventing HIV infection. Although this efficacy was modest, it presented a significant step towards HIV vaccine. So that was the RV144 trial. And then subsequently, after that, trials such as HVTN 505, such as Uhambo, Imbokodo, and Mosaico studies in South Africa and the rest of Africa, they were halted. In a nutshell, they were halted due to futility. There was no efficacy. So subsequent to RV144, there was no positive signal from similar studies. The one positive signal that came about was in the ARM study, which in effect did not reduce the risk of overall HIV infection, but VRCO1 did reduce the risk of HIV acquisition in a small subset of HIV strains that were highly sensitive to the broadly neutralizing antibody. And recently, the PrEP-VAX study has been stopped early due to futility. So why is it so challenging to develop an ideal HIV vaccine? We know that HIV is extraordinary. It has got extraordinary genetic diversity. It is hypervariable. The virus is error-prone during replication. As a result, there are multiple subtypes and strains circulating globally, number one. Also, the virus is capable of establishment of early viral reservoirs. So once these reservoirs have been established, it is challenging to eradicate the virus. The reservoirs, they typically comprise of HIV-infected CD4 plus T cells, and these cells remain dormant for years and years without producing viral particles, so it evades the immune system. There's also a role of antibodies in HIV vaccine development. We know that BNAbs could work very well in HIV vaccine, but we know that the HIV envelope protein is a poor immunogen, so there isn't, it complicates the induction of BNAbs through vaccination. We also learned about non-neutralizing antibodies in RV144. And one peculiar factor about HIV is that the HIV-1 envelope protein is shrouded, it's shielded by this glycan shield, which acts as a protective layer. So it masks these conserved neutralizing epitopes, so there is no identification by antibodies. And we know that the virus has got the capacity to invade immune responses, attack, and directly infect key immune factors. Another reason why it's difficult to have an ideal vaccine is that there's a lack of clear immune correlates of protection. So these are some of the reasons why it's hard for the field to come up with an ideal HIV vaccine. So what are the current and future directions? We know that BNAb-inducing vaccines are a key focus, and also vaccines inducing non-neutralizing responses for example, T cells are important. We need to have a combination approach. For example, a successful vaccine would need to engage both the innate, cellular, and humoral arm of the immune response. To the right here, you can see some of the studies that are ongoing. Some are looking at antibody combination studies, germline targeting, trimer immunizations, sequential and slow delivery. We have some MFV vaccines and novel vectors, as well as T cell vaccines. So here are some more vaccine, novel HIV vaccine approaches. I've talked about germline targeting. There's the use of novel adjuvants or employing newer immunogen delivery platforms. For example, the use of nanoparticles, mRNA, and ferritins. Also, there's new vaccine administration strategies. For example, the rapid vax, a dose escalation strategy that mimics natural acute HIV infection. And of course, we all know about prime boost studies and HIV epitope targets. And also, I talked about the conserved regions in the envelope. So we have approaches which are targeting the HIV conserved regions in the envelope, or the enzyme genomes. So these are some of the novel HIV vaccine development approaches that are currently ongoing worldwide. So coming to another reason why we might not have a vaccine at this moment, the impact of US government funding has really adversely affected HIV vaccine research. For example, we've heard about the halting of critical clinical trials. For example, the Brilliant Consortium, which is or was led by Glenda Gray, she'll be speaking soon. And this is a consortium, African-led initiative, which was focused on developing HIV vaccines for Africans by Africans, but this was stopped due to withdrawal of funding. So this was really critical, and I'll show you some of the studies which were halted even before we started. The withdrawal of funding also has resulted in the loss of infrastructure and expertise. The funding cuts have led to the dismantling of research infrastructure in affected regions. For example, South Africa has really been hit hard, like the rest of us. I'll show you some of the studies which have been stopped in South Africa. And we cannot conduct studies without community. And community engagement is vital for the success of HIV vaccine trials. So the disruption of the studies that we're doing will result in the communities losing faith in researchers. So already there's an ethical and scientific dilemma. This abrupt cessation of research trials raises significant ethical issues, and it undermines the principles of equity and inclusivity. So really, in summary, the suspension of US government funding has not only disrupted ongoing HIV vaccine research, but has also jeopardized the global effort to develop a preventive vaccine. And this highlights the need for stable and sustained investment in global health initiatives. So this slide shows some of the HIV vaccine trials that were being conducted or planned to be conducted. In South Africa, we have HV10-305, which was paused, HV10-316. The anticipated start date was third quarter, was April of 2025, but this has not yet started because of the funding issues. And then HV10-317, it is not yet recruiting as of May. All this is because of the funding issues. And then we had several cancelled studies. This slide shows the cancelled Brilliant Consortium HIV vaccine discovery program. We had several trials which were planned to happen in the next 5 or so years in multiple African countries, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and other studies. So all these have been suspended. And as you can see, we're going to learn a lot from the different types of studies that we're going to look at. For example, we're going to look at multiple founder variant-based vaccines, and this was going to be conducted in multiple African countries. But all this has been, I believe, it could be resuscitated with funding, but all this has been cancelled for now because of the funding withdrawal. So despite the challenges that we've faced as a field in terms of HIV vaccine development, I'm happy to say that HIV vaccine research itself has taught us a lot in terms of how to manage other viruses. For example, we've learned a lot about vaccine administration. We've learned a lot about vaccine platforms. There's been a lot of understanding of retrovirals. We've the field, the royal will, the field has come up with tools that can analyze RNA viruses at the molecular level. There's a lot significant immune research that has been done, a lot of community engagement, clinical research capacity, funding collaborations, research collaborations, and so HIV vaccine research has significantly influenced the development of other vaccines, particularly through advancements in vaccine platforms and immunological strategies. For example, the mRNA vaccine technology. This was initially aimed at stabilizing RNA for an HIV vaccine. It has led to the development of the mRNA vaccine, mRNA technology, leading to the creation of mRNA vaccines for COVID, like Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. So this really, HIV vaccine research expedited the progress of COVID-19 vaccine development. And we know that this technology, mRNA vaccine technology, is also being explored for other infectious diseases, including HIV itself, malaria, for example. We know that DNA vaccines, which were investigated in HIV research, are now being explored for other diseases like Zika and malaria. Viral vector vaccines being utilized for Ebola and COVID-19, protein subunit vaccines, which were developed for HIV, are being adapted for use against diseases like HPV and HPV. And I've talked about the clinical trials network and infrastructure. For example, the HIV vaccine trials network was really instrumental in conducting in conducting trials for COVID-19, the infrastructure, the human resource, the community, the regulatory environment had all been prepped for HIV vaccine trial. So it was easy to shift the subject from HIV to COVID-19. So really, despite the failures or the challenges or the setbacks in HIV vaccine development, there's been a lot that has come from HIV vaccine research. So coming back to the discussion at hand, HIV vaccines still relevant in this exciting, really exciting era of novel, longer-acting antiretroviral-based agents. Let us use lenacapavir as an example. We are all excited about Len. Len has got multiple advantages. For example, twice yearly lenacapavir, it shares important features with an ideal HIV vaccine. It is safe and highly efficacious for preventing HIV. And the efficacy observed in the PURPOSE trials, almost 100%, is similar to, if not greater than, that of many conventionally available vaccines. So this is a big plus for Len. And we know that Len is also thermostable, and it can be shipped and stored at room temperature. This is an important vaccine an important advantage over most of the HIV vaccine candidates. But the most obvious advantage of LEN at the moment for pre-exposure prophylaxis is that it is not hypothetical like the ideal HIV vaccine that I'm talking about. LEN is available now. So LEN has got really multiple advantages, and we are excited, and we hope it will come to the people who need it most. But that said, an ideal preventive HIV vaccine would offer several advantages over LEN. For example, currently the LEN that we have here would be administered twice a year. A vaccine would offer long-term immunity without regular dosing. We know that an ideal preventive vaccine with efficacy ranging from 30 to 90% would provide robust protection for 3 to 5 years. And the vaccine would be universally accessible and affordable. Vaccines can be produced and distributed more cost effectively than biologic therapies like LEN. At the moment, I'm not too sure what the cost of LEN is, but it won't compare to a preventive vaccine. It will be much, much, much more expensive. And I'm sure Mitch, if he's there, maybe he knows how much it's going to cost, or anyone else will talk about this during the discussion. And we know that in Purpose 2, there were 2 participants who had capsid resistance, but the advantage of an ideal vaccine candidate is that there's no risk of drug resistance. There's also no risk of drug-drug interaction, because we know that LEN is a small molecule. It's a small molecule drug which could be limited by drug-drug interactions. That's why the use of LEN with strong cytochrome P3A inducers is contraindicated. And we know that administering a vaccine would need simplified implementation. Worldwide, even in resource-limited setting, vaccination programs are well established, and if an HIV vaccine can be integrated into existing public health infrastructures, including childhood immunization schedules. And the last advantage that I have here is that there is potential for broader immune protection. So an ideal HIV vaccine could stimulate both humoral and cellular immune response, providing for broader immune protection. So these are some of the advantages that I could think of, the advantages of an HIV vaccine over LEN. So we know that LEN and other PrEP modalities, they represent a significant advancement in HIV prevention. However, the development of an HIV vaccine is still an essential component of the global multi-pronged strategy that is needed for ending the HIV epidemic. An ideal preventive HIV vaccine should address the vaccine development challenges that I've talked about, the challenges that we've faced thus far. An ideal preventive vaccine could offer longer lasting, cost-effective, and universally accessible protection, and an ideal preventive HIV vaccine should address some, if not all, of the limitations associated with the current PrEP options. So together with the robust biomedical sciences, we should ensure that there is creation and sustainability of regional research ecosystems in Africa. And I hope Glenda will talk more about that. We need to engage and capacitate early career investigators. For example, Kundai here, very instrumental in the capacitation of early career investigators, and meaningful community engagement and advocacy. It goes without saying. So in a nutshell, this is what I have for you, and a preventive HIV vaccine is needed. Thank you so very much. And back to you, Marlene. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nirazzo, for this great introduction and for setting the scene so well. So it's my privilege now to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to ask them to come on screen. And let me, before we deep dive into the panel discussion, let me introduce them to the audience. And I would like to start with Kundai Chinyenze. And Kundai leads the IAVI's Africa program in the development of affordable, globally accessible vaccines and over prophylactics biomedical interventions. She leads IAVI's capacity strengthening initiatives in the region and has led large consortia focused on HIV vaccine R&D. Today in the panel, we also have Yvette Raphael, who is currently the Executive Director of Advocates for the Prevention of HIV in Africa and a member of the African Women's Prevention Community Accountability Board. She serves also on the Board of Trustees of MTV-based Staying Alive. Yvette is deeply committed to HIV prevention R&D advocacy. We also have Glenda Gray in the panel today, who is the director of the Infectious Disease and Oncology Research Institute at Wits University and was the first female president and CEO of the South African Medical Research Council, where she spearheaded South Africa's scientific strategy and medical research priorities. She also is the co-principal investigator of the NIH-funded HIV vaccine trial network. Mitchell is also among us today, and Mitchell has been AVAC's executive director since 2004. He previously led vaccine preparedness at IAVI, directed international programs at Female Health Company, and directed PSI social marketing programs in South Africa and Europe. He is co-chair of the Global HIV Prevention Coalition, a member of the PEPFAR Scientific Advisory, and also our very own IS Governing Council and Towards an HIV Cure Initiative member. Mitchell is also the co-chair of the IS Industry Liaison Forum, the president of the TB Alliance Stakeholder Association, and the past president of the Global HIV Vaccine Enterprise. And finally, Gus Cairns, one of our panelists, is currently the co-chair of a combination prevention program at the European AIDS Treatment Group and an editorial consultant for AIDSmap.com. Gus's own encounter with HIV led him into a second career as a community HIV activist, and he edited the UK's magazine for people with HIV Positive Nation, then worked for 14 years as an editor of the HIV/AIDS information site AIDSmap, and is a long-standing advocate for biomedical HIV prevention. Very long introduction to our esteemed panelists, and I would like to give them the floor to start this conversation. And I would like to ask to each of you, from your perspective, why do you believe an HIV vaccine is still needed? And I'm going to ask you to answer within sort of 3 minutes intervention for each of you. Who would like to start? Well, I'm going to name
maybe let's pick on Glenda.
Glenda.
Glenda, why do you think we still need an HIV vaccine?
Can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Glenda, unfortunately.
Let's move to Gus while Glenda unmutes.
Oh, right. Okay. I was rather anticipating being last. Because I was going to say, well, you know, the other panelists have sort of made the case for the scientific case for the vaccine, as has already been made very eloquently. Because before, I think the shock of the Trump cuts and his election, and we were already not on track, as has been pointed out, to reach the UNAIDS Millennium Development Goals by 2030. But we thought we knew how to do it. You know, if we managed to get enough treatment, which equals U, and enough PrEP to the affected populations, we would eventually get to that goal. I think that what's happened in this year has been a profound shock in that it means there's some people just are not going to be turned by this argument. So I think one thing we've learned this year is if you tell people the scientific evidence for PrEP, even the scientific evidence and cost effectiveness of it, for PrEP and vaccines. You won't convince all of them. So how do you convince them? I think you have to look at what vaccines do almost in an anthropological way as being the sort of the picture people have in their heads of what a vaccine is. And I think despite the efforts of the vaccine skeptics, for most people, vaccines signal safety, a longer life, preserving the health of the community. I think one of the reasons PrEP was so effective is that, to quote an early article about it when it first came to America, PrEP equaled sex without fear. And that sort of argument, I think, worked particularly well for gay men, but maybe not quite so well for women. And I think, as we've seen from the trials in Africa, sometimes women need a different set of incentives, for instance, to take PrEP and maybe to use long-acting PrEP rather than oral PrEP. I think perhaps for them, sort of being a woman in a modern world without fear is perhaps more the sort of thing that sells it, because women have a lot of other things to contend with, such as unwanted pregnancies, intimate partner violence, the stigma of being a sexually active person at all. Okay. Maybe with vaccines, the image we have of them is from our childhood, from getting a jab from our friendly GP or the school nurse or somebody like that, or a mobile clinic. Because most vaccines, as has already been pointed out, are given to young people in childhood or in adolescence. And I think that's the sort of, not exactly the TPP, but the kind of cultural picture we have to create of what a vaccine against HIV can do in this very sort of frightening, fractious, competitive world we're in, that they offer safety rather than danger. And I think I'll leave it at that, but I can explore further aspects of that.
Thank you, Gus. I'm going to ask the question now to Glenda, if your microphone is back.
Sure. Is that better?
It is perfect. So why do you believe an HIV vaccine is still needed?
So I think, even today is even more reason why we need an HIV vaccine, because when global partnerships and financing mechanisms fall apart, you need the most affordable and the most durable intervention that will not require ongoing sustenance of a health system. So an HIV vaccine is even more needed now, because even though Naradza spoke about the interventions with long-acting antiretrovirals, as our health systems start to collapse, it's unlikely that we'll be able to take these powerful interventions to scale, given the cost and the complexity of health systems. And so a vaccine will be durable. It's the only way in the end to really try and control an epidemic, as we've seen with polio, measles, and COVID. And we know that the moment we take away these powerful interventions, we get resurgence, like you're seeing in the US. HIV vaccines would also work in infants and would be a powerful prime, one, to prevent against breast milk transmission, but also to be boosted during adolescence. And so I do think an HIV vaccine is the most affordable, safe, durable, and implementable intervention to control an epidemic like HIV.
Thank you, Glenda. Kundai, the same question to you.
Thanks, Marianne. So to be additive, I just want to highlight a couple of things. When we look at lenacapavir, I think we're all very excited about those advances, for example, including long-acting injectable cabotegravir. Some of these tools are targeted, are given in systems where they are sort of focusing on certain populations or specific populations. And when we look at vaccination approaches typically, and what we are probably hoping to achieve with an HIV vaccine is something that may be universally available, particularly in populations where there are generalized epidemics. And so that gives us greater potential for population level impact when we are leveraging a vaccine that is available for more.
I'm afraid we lost you for a bit, Kundai.
With certain tools. You did? My apologies.
No
It says
worries, you're
the
back.
internet is unstable. Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Okay, my apologies for that. One important piece is for some of these prevention tools, individuals have to self-identify as being at HIV, at risk of HIV, to be able to seek some of these prevention tools. And hopefully an HIV vaccine will be able to help us address that by being universally available for individuals and populations who may not be willing to leverage ARV-based interventions. And then I think I'll talk about one more piece related to resistance. I think we also acknowledge that we continue to face the threat of resistance, as Nyaradzo mentioned in her presentation, and our ability to leverage a combination of tools, the long-acting injectable antiretrovirals, as well as vaccines, I think allows us to be able to preserve potentially some of these drugs that are leveraged both for treatment and for prevention. And so an HIV vaccine may be able to help us address some of these resistance issues that we may be facing in years to come. So I will stop there. I know there are several reasons to allow others to give their input. Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Yvette and then Mitchell.
All right, thank you so much. And I think my colleagues have mentioned all of the reasons that we all agree on, but on a community level and a personal level, I would like to say that that brings us closer to a cure. If we don't have a vaccine, it doesn't show that there is light at the end of the tunnel for a cure for HIV, and that is what communities are so passionate about. Also, the issue around personal cost, as well as Glenda has mentioned, and control for myself as a woman, or for us as communities, that you can take a vaccine that you are responsible for. So I just wanted to mention those 3 points. It's important that we know that the end goal for us is a cure, and a vaccine brings us closer. Thank you.
Mitchell, it's not easy. You're the last of this series, the first question of this nice panelist. So
it's hard to follow anyone, particularly Yvette. But I think all of my fellow panelists have answered the question beautifully about why we still need one. I think I might, and maybe this is the movement into the next set of questions. I don't think it's a question of do we need one. I think the absolute answer is absolutely we do. The issue is, can we develop one? How do we accelerate the development of one? And when might we have one? And those 3 questions to me are far more challenging to answer than do we still need one? And I think Nyaradzo kind of set us up for that. I do want to say, I think we need to think about I don't think we need one because of all of the challenges of PrEP or other prevention modalities. I think we need to think about this as, what is the true end game strategy? It's related to what Yvette said about a cure. I think we need to talk about what a durable end to the epidemic looks like. Let's remember the UN, despite all of the political challenges, still adheres to an idea of ending HIV as a public health threat by 2030. As Gus said, we're off target from that even before we hit January 20th, 2025. But that is still a target that is set. Maybe it's 2030, maybe it's 2035, maybe it's never going to be delivered. But we will get further towards that goal even without an HIV vaccine. We need an HIV vaccine because that's how you durably end an epidemic, not how you do it with treatment and prevention. And so I think it's really important that we think about this and in a sequence of activities. And we need to do everything we can to get to the end of a public health threat, but that doesn't provide a durable end to an epidemic. That's what a vaccine does. And I think we need to be really clear in our language, because I don't think we need it because Len is a problem or because we didn't do well with PrEP or circumcision was never fully realized. Each of those remains important. It's about durability, and we talk about durability in a couple of different ways, and we should talk about durability because that's the most important thing. Durability of an individual vaccine and durability about epidemics ending.
Thank you, Mitchell. We're going to now go into a set of individual questions, conversation, but please, all the questions are targeted or directed to one speaker. Feel free to also engage and let us know your thoughts. And I'm speaking to my panelists there.
So maybe, Mitchell, you were there. I hear you when you talk about durability and how we are going to end the epidemic. I totally agree. And We also need to look at how we are phrasing our the language, yeah. But just moving slightly sideways. So given the rising anti-vaccine and anti-science sentiment globally, what should be the priority number one for HIV prevention advocates right now, especially to protect the future of HIV vaccine research and rollout? So Mitchell, Yvette, what do you think should be our number one priority for advocates right now? Mitchell. Or Yvette,
Go ahead, Yvette.
No, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for keeping the lights on when it's difficult. We know it's very difficult as it is. I think important for us is to understand that when we include communities in HIV research agendas, including vaccines, it is not just beneficial, but it is very essential. It sets us up for understanding what the communities think of such an intervention, but it also builds trust. I want to make an example with COVID, where we saw the communities lead in the education and dispelling myths. There's one example that I would like also to make about Doreen Moracha. She's a young woman from Kenya, and she is doing HIV research cure education amongst her peers. I've never seen such a movement around a science topic, because it's led with so much, so much trust and fun, and the young people actually understands her. The young people, they actually believe in the words that she says, but also most importantly, her government officials also listening, and she has the ears and she attracts the attention of health officials. So involving communities ensures that we actually have tailored and timely, communications with regards to our intervention. And communities have led the way before in creating systems that build world-class HIV treatment and prevention programs, and they can do it again. I'd like to see communities being engaged, not only as partners at the table, but also in tailoring some of the way forwards in how this should happen. And we have an opportunity to do that. Thanks, Nyarazo.
And maybe I'll just add that Yvette and many other partners on the line and civil society came together to create just last year the People's Research Agenda, and I'll put the link here. It's a really exciting body of work led by advocates from around the world to look not just at vaccines, but across all of HIV prevention. And I would argue, Nyarazo, it's really two things that need to be prioritized. One is to really make sure we talk about the development to delivery agenda broadly. We need to deliver what we have at scale with speed and with equity. And that includes PrEP in all its forms. And we need to develop a vaccine, other next generation PrEP options, and a cure. And we need to get advocates. I think one of the things we see now is we have PrEP advocates. We now have a growing, as Yvette just described, a great cure body of advocates. And then we have vaccine advocates. We need people to be ending AIDS advocates who connect the dots around delivering what we have and developing what we still need. And so that's part one. And the other part to that is, I think for me, one of the most important things, we spent a lot of time over the last many years, all of us, talking about efficacy trials and working with Glenda and colleagues at the HBTN who really drove all of the HIV vaccine efficacy trials, and understanding test of concept versus phase 2B, phase 3. That was where we focused a lot of our collective energy. In vaccines, we are way upstream in tiny discovery medicine trials. So for me, one of the most important things for advocates is to focus on target product profiles. And you described it in your own presentation. What does a vaccine look like of the future? An HIV vaccine that's context specific, that actually adds to the HIV/AIDS response, and in a significant way. So really unpacking what we want. So we're not just advocating for a vaccine, we're advocating for a very particular kind of vaccine that's going to fill a gap in the field. And that means relatively high efficacy compared to what we have, long durability, that it lasts for a number of years, as you described, because a short-acting vaccine for a year needs to be 100, it needs to be closer to 100% like Len, but if it lasts 5 years, then its efficacy could probably be more like 70%. So advocates need to, we need to collectively up our game in understanding target product profiles and how to really drive. And that's a lot of what the People's Research Agenda describes.
Thank you, Mitchell, and thank you for bringing in the conversation about TPP for HIV vaccine, which lead us a little bit to the research ecosystem. And I would like to ask Glenda, do you see any opportunities for regional research ecosystem in Africa as global funding patterns have been dramatically shifting in the past month, days, hours?
Yes, yeah, so I think it's a great opportunity for African scientists and African governments to look within the continent to provide a funding framework that promotes collaboration and intercountry work and collaboration. And just like we did with both Advance and Brilliant, we found that with dedicated funding, a lot of work could be done on the continent. And so we need to take these experiences from Advance and Brilliant and get our continent to start to fund research and development, particularly in the area of HIV vaccines. And so we have been working very hard with our government to try and create a funding ecosystem for HIV vaccine and other HIV and TB research, and work with other partners from the European Union and other BRICS countries. So this stoppage of work, or stopping of flowing of the NIH money to South Africa, and the reduction in access to the USAID funding for R&D has been quite catastrophic in the short term, and has made us try and diversify as quickly as possible. So at this moment, even though we are continuing, it's at a much smaller pace, which means that our ability to collaborate on a continental level is severely curtailed, and that that whatever we do, whether it's through the HIV, through NIH, HVTN networks, or through other networks, whatever we do is going to take much slower, because of the lack of participation of South Africa and other African countries like Zimbabwe, Botswana, Mozambique, Uganda, and Kenya in the HIV vaccine agenda. So I do think the world is poorer for this, and I do think the kind of translation of HIV vaccine research is going to be severely curtailed by the lack of participation of Africa. So we do have to continue to find other avenues of research, and we do need to continue to push for diplomatic and political advocacy to try and make sure that we can either restore the funding, or we can make sure that the funding can be rapidly replaced by other interventions. So this is a catastrophic time for HIV vaccine research on the continent, and it's a catastrophic time for everyone at a global level, because a lot of the work that we were going to be doing in South Africa is now being redeployed to the US, which is very sad, because of our ability to translate from a Caucasian European ancestry background to the genetic diversity we have on our continent. So I think it's a great tragedy that we're seeing vaccine trials having to be moved back to the US, where we've developed this great capacity on the continent.
Thank you, Glenda. And yes, this is catastrophic, but I like your optimism that things will restart soon. And I'm always saying that we talk about decolonization of health research. So as Africans, we now need to start doing it ourselves. So we really need to work on an ecosystem which is good for research. So thank you for those sentiments. Thank you so much, Glenn. So Kundai, perhaps let's come to you. So I talked about how the USG funding withdrawal has affected, clinical trial sites and how we've lost staff and so forth. So what, in your opinion, what risks do you see in terms of losing the scientific expertise, the infrastructure, and community trust that we've taken years to build in partnership with countries most affected by HIV? This is a two-pronged question. What or how is IAVI trying to preserve or mitigate that in the face of shifting funding priorities? Kundai.
Thanks, Nyerazo. I think just following on to, acknowledging Glenda's comments and the importance of that ecosystem that we have built over time. In your presentation, Nyerazo, I think you gave a great overview of how the research towards HIV vaccines has really supported the broader global health system. And we had examples from COVID. And it's important to keep, I think, highlighting some of those investments to made towards HIV vaccine and how they over time have increasingly contributed to elements that are really topical, such as global health security, our ability to respond to outbreaks, our ability to address other issues. And so when we begin to remove the structures that support these systems and the ecosystem, and we're thinking it's only about HIV, it's not only about HIV, it is a much broader system that we are impacting, and our ability to address some of the regional priorities. In Africa, we talk about increased regional, manufacturing to ensure that populations have greater access to vaccines. And, for you to get there, you want to have a clinical trial ecosystem that supports the development of those products or even supporting the bridging studies. And so it's really critical how we will be able to engage with some of our local governments and within the regions to help them understand this is not about HIV. This is about the broader health ecosystem that we really need to support to ensure that some of our long-term global health priorities remain intact. And when we talk about communities, again, it's the same thing. When we were, during COVID, we were leveraging systems that had been developed for HIV networks. And when we were, those information networks, the trust that had been built was really critical in sort of disseminating information and trying to address disinformation. And it's really critical, again, that we go back and try and maintain that, because, again, it's the same principle. It goes beyond HIV. The same communities we're going to around HIV trials are the same ones we're going back with regards to TB, malaria, and all sorts of other diseases. And so we really want to, it's critical for all of us to preserve these systems. And I think even going forward, even amongst ourselves, sometimes we can become so siloed and think that this is only about HIV. And I think our ability, and when we communicate the impact of this, to go beyond HIV, to talk to the communities and policymakers about our desire to address the prevailing needs that may go beyond HIV, that it is about really integrating the components. And as we build for HIV, we also build for other things. As we preserve for other things, we can also preserve for HIV. And I just want to touch on one piece that's sort of dear to my heart, which is really about making sure that in each, HIV continues to be a global challenge. It's not just about Africa. You still see South America, there are issues, parts of Asia. And whilst it's great that the US in some cases can continue with some of the research in this sort of defunded ecosystem, it is important that we highlight, from a regional perspective, the continuation of the scientists from those regions continuing to drive the scientific agenda forward, continuing to lead the science, to analyze their own data and generate the data. And that creates these local and regional hubs where young and early career scientists can plug into and work from, so that they are, we have these hubs that are set up within Africa that are really generating, data for the primary endpoints for these studies. And that's how we can, we build this up, and we continue to ensure that we have a pipeline of scientists that can contribute not only again to HIV, very importantly so, but also to other disease areas that we are trying to address. And so I think, when we talk about sort of IAVI and how we're trying to address some of these challenges, is really stepping back and acknowledging that our messaging, when we are going whether to other funders, trying to engage with governments, is really talking about the comprehensive need for global health and how we need to support these systems for HIV, for TB, for malaria, and other disease areas, and seeing how within those systems you can ensure that we maintain the ecosystem and the structures that we have built over time. Thanks.
Thanks, Kundai. Just following on your response, Kundai. Glenda, can you tell us a bit, like walk us through what happens behind the scenes when you have a funder, particularly a major one like the US government, pulling support midstream, and not for scientific reasons, but for political reasons?
Well, I think the first thing you do is you try and replace the funding that you've lost. And so we were just about to start an HIV vaccine trial at the end of January. And we had the vaccine in the country, and we had regulatory approvals and ethics approvals. So all the hard work had been done, and we had started to screen for participants. And so when this happened, we started to look for alternate funding and to see who could step in and support the work that we're doing. And we had conversations with the Gates Foundation, and to see whether we could make our trial smaller and in order and simpler, in order to find a budget that could help move this program forward. So those are the conversations that we've had with the Gates Foundation to try and move the program forward. And the Gates Foundation have been incredibly responsive and supportive, and I think they are deeply concerned by the funding gaps now on the African continent, and are conducting a whole risk assessment to see how to mitigate all these problems. And so we've had other conversations, obviously, with our government. Our government has our universities through our Department of Higher Education have prepared a submission to Treasury for relief funding, and we also have worked through the Medical Research Council to convene a funders forum to try and get leverage funding together with the Treasury. So in the last couple of months, a lot of work has been done in South Africa to try and get this replacement funding, and to try and make sure we can get other money to come into the country. But as Naratso says, I think what this catastrophe has taught us is that we as scientists and as advocates, so we as community members, as scientists, as people that are involved in trying to move medical research forward, we have a responsibility to make sure our governments are funding research and development to the kind of levels that we see in the US, in South Korea, in Singapore. So we should be pushing our countries to spend at least 2% of their GDP on research and development, and we should, as a community, start to pressurize our governments through the AU, through the Treasury, to make sure that they understand the value of science. And so what we've done poorly in Africa is we failed to convince our politicians and our governments that if you invest in science, you invest in the economy. If you invest in science, you invest in growth, and take the lessons that we've seen from other poor countries who've become major R&D players, for instance, Singapore, South Korea, Rwanda is also developing this capability. But we have Yvette, we have a responsibility to start to push our governments to spend more money in R&D on our continent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Glenda. Thank you. I hope I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Glenda. So you suggest that we look for alternate funders to replace the funding which has been withdrawn, and that our governments really should be in the forefront of funding our research, and we need to ensure that they understand the value of health research. Yeah, so thank you. So maybe let's move back to Gus. We have been talking about the perceived success of current and emerging biomedical prevention tools, and Glenda just talked about finding alternate pots of funding. Do you think this perceived success and the emerging biomedical prevention tools may lead to the old funders or new funders or policymakers in general to deprioritize vaccine research? Gus.
I hope not. And I think that I've already sort of laid out very, very convincing reason why they should not. But I think I've been reading a lot of articles recently about how sort of, and I mean, this is like leaving Africa in terms of the way journalists think out of the picture, but whether America's misfortune in terms of research may be Europe's gain. We've already heard about the Gates Foundation reconsidering its strategy in the view of the PEPFAR cuts. I think the EU should be certainly firmly targeting health research much more. The EU is a big old oil tanker. It takes a long time to turn around. Their next big scientific program is Horizon 2027, and the clue is in the year. That's when the next large projects are expected to start, but we should be, I mean, researchers should be bombarding the EU with applications for research right now, and also individual countries, because there are good programs particularly of cure research. But as I've said in answer to one of the questions already, I think that a vaccine and a cure may well end up being essentially the same thing with HIV, because you have to target HIV-infected cells. So, I mean, in places like the IAVI Caixa Research Consortium in Spain, there are a number of other examples in individual companies in Europe. I think we need not to be naive about money, though. A lot of health systems outside the US, even the ones not in Africa, are cash strapped. For instance, the English NHS has still yet to approve cabotegravir PrEP. It's not that they haven't, that the regulators have approved it. You can use it, but then that gets sent to our health technology agency, NICE, which are allowed to look at cost effectiveness. And if they decide that something's too costly to use, no matter how effective it is, then they won't recommend it to doctors. So that sort of, I'm very used to that kind of step already having taken place in terms of PrEP approval. We mustn't forget that even if we do put a lot of money into our research, we need to make a really convincing marketing case while that research is happening. And that point has already been made by cure advocates.
Thank you. I think we are now going to open the floor to the participants' questions. So let me start. And we have a question from the audience. asking from Palesa Licotti, asking, as HIV vaccine research moves forward, are we making sure that young people, especially those in low-resource communities, will actually be able to access and trust the vaccine when it becomes available? And I'm opening the question to all our panelists.
So I think we spend as HIV vaccine researchers who work in our settings, Naratso and myself and all the other investigators that we work, we make a concerted effort to do a lot of community engagement. And we do have community advisory boards, and we have community advocates that work with us at a community level to try and make sure we can bring in people and engage with them so that there is a level of trust in the work that we do.
Thanks, Glenda. Can I go next, Marlene? I think
And then Garcia, go ahead.
yes, as an organization, APA, Advocates for the Prevention of HIV and AIDS, of HIV in Africa, we also engage with young people. We make sure that they engage exactly with what Glenda says within the advisory boards. We ensure that young people are part of webinars, but most importantly is that IAVI had a Young Leaders Academy last year during especially this time, and many of our young people were part of that academy and took part of it. And these young people do not only engage with, with other leaders in their communities, but they are part of the communities and they engage with their peers, which is very important and which we have seen is as a model that does work. We empower leaders to be able to engage in their communities. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I can say a little more about that if you want. I mean, I think it's already been said. I think Nyadza said something about we need to be giving it to people before they start having sex. I think that I've said the best model for how to picture an HIV vaccine in terms of its TPP is probably the HPV vaccine, which let's not forget caused considerable controversy when it was first introduced. But is now available to adolescent girls in large parts of the world and is extraordinarily effective. It's having a huge impact on the rate of cervical cancer amongst that population. There are still struggles with that one. I mean, we need to give it to, more countries need to be giving it to adolescent boys because they will end up, some of them will end up having sex with other men and it doesn't protect them. So that's a really good example for the kind of how I think I would like to see the HIV vaccine, when we have an effective one or even a partially effective one, as Mitch said, introduced. I think it's got to go to adolescents.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Yeah, I want to say, and I agree with Gus. I mean, the HPV vaccine is in some ways a holy grail. I mean, that's what, and I think about earliest days, and Glenda knows it better than anyone. Originally, that was a 3-dose regimen. And my daughter actually is still angry that she got 3 doses when she was a teenager because now she heard that you only had to get 1, and she's mad at me. Not my fault. But we do want a single dose that has what seems to be lifelong immunity that can really end cervical cancer. That's what we do want for HIV. I do want to caution, though, that's not where we are with HIV. I mean, we're talking about a completely different pathogen. And I know someone asked a question about how can we, use what we learned in COVID? Well, in fact, COVID used what it learned from HIV to get us a COVID vaccine. That's a vaccine that only lasts once a year. And I won't even get into the politics in my country about whether you get it every year or not. But I think we need to look at all of those analogies, but analogies can play tricks on us. Yes, we want an HIV vaccine to be like HPV. We are a very, very, very long way from that. So I want to make sure we don't, because if we had that, then yes, I'd say give it to everybody, just like Niradzo said, and that's very different than what we do in PrEP programs, or I think Kundai said that. But if it only lasts a year or two, and it's only 50 or 60% effective, do we really want to give it to adolescent girls? And I'm not saying we don't. I'm just saying those are the conversations we need to have. And I want to make sure that going forward, back to your first question, Marlene, what is the advocacy agenda of the future? It's making sure that we hold all stakeholders to account and that we don't overpromise. We don't say, oh, an HIV vaccine is going to be like HPV. Yes, we want it. We aspire to that. But that's not where we're going to be in the short term. That's not where we're going to be in 2030, 2035. It's where we hope we get. And we now know the Gates Foundation has a 20-year time horizon. And I think we're going to see major investments, I hope, in R&D that drives us there. But I think we need a much longer arc view and be a little bit more clear what is aspirational and what is feasible in the short term. Because if we don't, I'll just add, if we don't, then I think we are going to diminish our trust and confidence with communities. If we say we're going to develop this, and then we say, oh, we said we were going to give you one dose that's going to last for a lifetime, but we only have this 4-dose regimen that's 50% effective, people are going to say, well, wait a minute, you told me this, and now you're giving me that. So I think we need clarity and transparency in the conversation.
Mm.
Thank you. So I think it was you guys who talked about the symbiotic relationship between STIs and HIV and unmet need for contraception in terms of HIV acquisition. We have a comment here. Francis says, an HIV vaccine, just like PrEP, still leaves us with the risk of STIs unaddressed. But discovering an HIV vaccine would push the need for an STI vaccine. And I think one of the panelists had started addressing this. If we could just talk about this, what are your thoughts regarding pushing for an STI vaccine, the potential for a multi-purpose prevention technology? We're deviating a bit from an HIV vaccine, but I think this is applicable to our discussion. So we'll start with you guys, but Glenda, anyone else, could I please feel free to come in?
It's a great question because it leads straight on from what Mitch was saying. I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we mustn't. We must start from where we are in terms of an HIV vaccine. But I think in terms of their sort of cultural position, then STI vaccines are similar, even if their efficacy is very different. However, very interestingly, and to me a bit unexpectedly, BASH, which is the British STI doctors organization, has just recommended the gonococcal, not the meningococcal B vaccine for gonorrhea for MSM. Now, this is a vaccine that's only 40% probably efficacious, but I think this is, as it were, at the other end of the vaccine story. There is research going into gonorrhea vaccines. There is research going into chlamydia vaccines. But at the moment, we haven't got big efficacy. But clearly, some thought has gone into, well, if we can just at least blunt the curve of gonorrhea infections among MSM, then this is a beginning. We can start doing this. And also, I think that yeah, we all know that HIV vaccine is, as it were, the Mars shot of vaccines, but STI vaccines may be a way of continuing to generate public interest in the potential of an HIV vaccine. It's like kind of the Mars shot of research versus the moon shot. That's the comparison I'd make.
Yeah, it's tricky. And yeah, I mean, I think obviously, preventing sexually transmitted infections is important. And as Gus says, it's important. We do need to find STI vaccines, and we also need to find better treatment modalities, particularly with resistant sexually transmitted infections. And finding an effective HIV vaccine doesn't take away the issue of making sure that people have access to early diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of STIs, and also to make sure that it's easy to use preventative methods like condoms to try and prevent some of the STIs as well. So one has to continue to ensure that people are protected from STIs and that their rapid access to diagnosis and treatment to mitigate the side effects of STIs. And lots of work still needs to be done in that area.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe just to just very quickly echo what Glenda said, it's important to, to strengthen some of the existing systems around mechanisms for addressing STIs. Also important to advocate for HIV vaccines. And I think Mitchell just posted something in the chat related to that. I think from a scientific perspective, we also want to acknowledge that, I think it's a great vision to have a vaccine multiple targets and can address multiple issues, right? HIV, STIs in sort of one shot, and that's great. And you walk off protected from a range of diseases. We're probably a few ways off from that. We still have to get to an HIV vaccine, which Mitchell highlighted. It's been a very complex virus, and I think, as we said, now looking at sort of early stages of development, we've had to go back to sort of what we sort of calling discovery medicine trials, or sort of these early stage components where we are confirming and wanting to address some immunological components we need to really understand and be able to select sort of the best regimens to drive forward towards an actual vaccine. And that may take time. And when you're looking at the STI space, I think it's great to see the progress in the gonorrhea space. And also, as mentioned, in chlamydia, there's a lot of work that's already ongoing there. Those pathogens may have a lower bar in terms of being able to develop vaccines for that, because they are not as complex. And so that may be an advocacy component to say we should invest into obtaining vaccines in this area, because it's potentially very possible, whilst it may take a longer time for HIV. And then I think after a while we may then consider potentially combining them. But a vaccine for STIs is potentially much more possible. I mean, it's probably an easier target to address compared to HIV, and so we definitely should invest in those endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. So Kundai, you talked about targeting multiple pathogens. Yes. And it's really commendable. I mean, and it's possible for us to come up with a vaccine for STIs, chlamydia, gonorrhea, and so forth. Now we're talking about multiple epitopes. There is a question here from Rocher. What is the current thinking about vaccine generating V1, V2 binding antibodies? So in my presentation, I talked about the envelope protein, which is shrouded by the glycan shield. So this question really is now talking about what is the current thinking or procedures about a vaccine which will generate V1, V2 binding antibodies. So question
I'm
to
happy.
anyone.
Yeah. I think it's very important, Regia. I mean, if there's any spot on the HIV vaccine that has consistently shown some associates or correlates of protection, even with binding antibodies, if we look at the RV144 and some of the subgroup analyses of the vaccine trials we've done, V1, V2 area always comes up as a spot where if you induce good antibody response and they're just binding, you can get some levels of protection. And a lot of focus has been on the CD4 binding site in terms of inducing broadly neutralizing antibodies. And it's also reassuring to see that people are moving away, from just looking at CD4 binding site immunogens and looking at other epitope targets like V1, V2, like MPER and fusion proteins. So I think that we should also endeavor to try and induce neutralizing antibodies to the V2 region of HIV, and hopefully one day there will, I guess the goal is, if we are looking for neutralizing antibody vaccines, is to have polyvalent vaccines that have components in that induce neutralizing antibodies to all the regions that we think may support protection. So, I think there is movement in the field to look at that, and your vaccine as well. Maybe you should, has great potential in that area, and there's some other work with CAP256 immunogens, but the Duke group that are also starting to target those areas with HIV. So I agree that we do need to have immunogens that look at that part of the virus.
Thank you. We'll be coming to the end of this webinar very soon, and I would like to ask one last question to all our panelists. And my question is, if you could think of one concrete action going forward when we're going to all, leave the call, go back to our daily life, what would that be? What could we do that could be the most impactful? Mitchell, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to answer first this time.
It's a wonderful question, Marlene. I would basically go back to what I described in, whether you call it a target product profile or not, is that we align as a field, that scientists, product developers, the few that are left, the funders, and most importantly, to Yvette's point, communities, around what it is we're trying to accomplish, not just using kind of an HIV vaccine as a placeholder of what we need, but what specifically are we working towards, and then come up with the interim milestones. So a year from now, we are further along than we were in May 2025. So what does success look like in May 2026? And what might we accomplish by, say, May 2030, just as a suggestion, but to get really specific and granular about what that vaccine looks like and how it adds value into the HIV prevention landscape.
Thank you, Mitchell. Guess one concrete action.
I'd go the other way. If I had the access, I would go to the Director General of Health in the European Union and say, you guys paid for the most complex and expensive scientific experiment that has ever existed, namely the Large Hadron Collider, in order to find an elusive subatomic particle. If you can do that, you can find an HIV vaccine.
Thank you. Kundai.
I think for me, continuing to advocate for pipelines of scientists, our early mid-career scientists, to continue to be part of this journey and leveraging some of the continuing interest around capacity strengthening, whether it's for clinical trials or for systems around other global health priorities, and leverage that to ensure that our young and early career scientists in the different regions, and now I'm going to speak particularly to Africa, that they continue to be supported to be able to contribute to what has become a smaller focused pipeline of critical path trials, that they are part of that process and are helping us to drive forward what we need, because this is going to be a long haul and we need to make sure that pipeline of scientists is still intact.
Thank you, Kundai. Yvette.
Thank you so much. I would say the G20 is coming up, and I would want us to be a little bit more radical. We are struggling with funding. How do we use the G20 meeting as advocates, researchers, to really engage leadership and leaders? I think previous leaders have legacies that are tangible, that we can count on. And I don't think the presidents who will be coming into South Africa want their legacies to be failing HIV and bringing down systems that was there to ensure there's eventually a cure as well as a vaccine. So how do we strategize as advocates, as researchers, to ensure we have access to leaders at the G20 that is happening in South Africa? I know I did a little bit of patriotism there, but yes, we must use that space to hold leaders accountable. This cannot be their legacy.
Thank you. And Glenda.
The only thing that I can do at this moment in time is to continue to work with vaccine developers to make sure we can move these vaccines forward. And so I'm excited about the experimental medicine studies that are happening. I'm excited to engage with people who are discovering vaccines, and I want to work with them so that we can do experimental medicine studies so we can design the next generation vaccine. So I just want to keep doing the research so we can find results. We have to keep moving forward step by step.
Thank you. Thank you. everybody. I would like to thank my wonderful co-moderator, Nyadzo, for sharing this webinar with me today, as well as our panelists and the participants for the very great question. And now I'm going to hand over to Jacob.
Great, thank you. It's inspiring to hear such a dynamic discussion. On behalf of IAVI and our co-organizers, the Global HIV Vaccine Enterprise of the IAS, I want to thank all the participants today, as well as our wonderful panelists. A recording of this session will be made publicly available shortly on IAS Plus. Looking forward to seeing you at future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Thank you.
You all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone. Bye.